we have a true innovator at the intersection of advanced technologies, immersive environments, and material-focused spatial design. Randy Fernando is an architectural designer, artist, researcher, photographer, and educator who brings a wealth of experience and creativity to his work. Randy is an architectural designer at Studio North Architecture, an adjunct professor at the University at Buffalo, and a lecturer at Buff State University Art and Design. As the creative director of Move, a design and research studio, Randy leads projects that integrate novel and experimental research into practical architectural applications. Move focuses on sustainable design practices and community-oriented initiatives promoting the hacking of conventional tools to create unconventional synergies that create new realities. In his teaching roles, Randy combines cutting-edge approaches with hands-on learning, encouraging students to experiment with AI, 3D printing, and digital fabrication. He teaches core media, structures, and computer application courses across both universities, always striving to connect learning experiences back to industry practice and community partners in Western New York. Additionally, he co-leads the Sustainable Futures Study Abroad program in Costa Rica, where students tackle big topics such as sustainable, affordable housing, coastal resilience, and green infrastructure. Randy's current research investigates the use of EEG headsets to assess psychological responses and neurological health in architectural curated physical spaces, and digitally manipulates environments using XR and AI. He also explores micro and macro material prototypes and designs for invisible elements through thermal imaging, 3D scanning, microscopes, and digital simulations. So, for the last time tonight, please, let's get loud and welcome the visionary Randy Fernando.
So my talk today is called Between Scales, and maybe it's not going to be about one building, but a line of thinking between how I approach buildings and what inspires me to get there. And again, thank you for Alex's introduction for a lot of things that I do. I end up cross-interfacing multiple disciplines and kind of ways of thinking in the work that I do. Never asked me to do a mind map, because ultimately it always looks like this. It's very messy, it's very unorganized, and it's mainly because I move between all these different approaches and topics and ways of thinking as an educator, but also as a practitioner. So I always encourage my students to do the same, because it ultimately leads to revelations that they might not have thought about otherwise. So I represent a couple different brands. Again, I've worked with Brad, for instance, who was here, also talking with people like Albert and Sean in the back. Wild Nomad Media is a photography and film company. Move is my research outlet. And then Studio North Architecture is a practice led by Randy Fernando, who's also a colleague of mine at University at Buffalo. So I first approach scale from thinking about things through photography and film. Thankfully, me and my partner, Jocelyn Morocho, travel Central America and South America over the past couple of years, and I noticed things like how the Incans, the Aztecs, and the Mayans have been building for centuries, and how timeless their architecture has been. So I wonder what's happened now as a result. So as I think about scale, one of the projects that came up as of this April during the eclipse, we got the opportunity to work on a small installation that interfaced the cosmic scale. So thinking about the eclipse back to an installation and back to people underneath it. So ultimately, abstracting these constellations, they became these 8-foot panels suspended in the air, and we're able to interface the pattern of the constellation and also the eclipse down to the projection below. So we got to map out the eclipse as it was happening during the actual event. Luckily for us, when we took these photos, it was really sunny outside. During the eclipse, unfortunately, it was kind of cloudy. And it led me to thinking more about some of the kind of buildings that we ended up producing as a part of Studio North. So this project, Shorn Space Theater, located in Broadway Fillmore, was one of the first when I came back to Buffalo during 2019. And it got me thinking about the larger campus and relationships of buildings between Torn Space, Adam Miscavige Library, but also the connection back to the community. So for me, as a media instructor, I was very fascinated in our construction drawings about revealing moments or fleeting moments in time and experiences in the spaces. So our drawings represented ideas of how people occupied things like the pits, floating boulders, right, and connections back to the outside through the nanowall doors. So this is a pretty scary scene for me because I was going to put a jump scare here, but unfortunately for me, I realized mechanical systems are just as scary for us to coordinate with as architects. So one of the hardest things to do was actually make the entire black box theater so simple, right, that it had to remain quiet and almost fading into the background, which came by essentially coordinating all of those systems together. Shifting scales, again, we moved down to the facade scale. So in the past 2 years, we've been focusing a lot on dealing with materiality like clay. In this specific scenario, we were trying to replace a lot of carbon-emitting kind of facade systems with clay-oriented replacements. In this case, understanding the kind of ideas of thermal bridging and how it might help thermal performance by utilizing earthen materials. So in my work recently, I've been really focused on invisible forces. So understanding how heat, for instance, transfers in interior to exterior environments, but also running simulations precursor to actually starting the design when it comes to architectural practice, so that we have a good background of understanding the site and kind of context. That's also led into 3D scanning, so moving away from kind of 2D flattened kind of surveying techniques to thinking about how do we document texture, materiality, and some of the ways that we might survey architecture in the beginning of the process so we make deeper relationships later in the process. This ultimately has led to more in-depth drawings in which we're able to actually profile out old stone wall foundation conditions with newer kind of concrete foundations that get implemented afterwards. So we get really detail-oriented about documenting a lot of that materiality through 3D scanning and even 3D printing to be able to kind of work with our clients and also engineers and consultants with when it comes to designing the space. Shifting scales again, even further, thinking about the human brain and psychology. We've been moving into understanding EEG brainwaves and how they react to the different spaces that we create. We've been able to associate that with things like mycelium, a root network for mushrooms, in which they kind of represent the neural pathways that we have in our brains. Moving in scale again, we now think about AI, or artificial intelligence, has emerged, and how we might broaden our creative capacity when it comes to design and architecture. To the left, a prompt about a villain's lair in the style of brutalism, but they love puppies, is what a student created. So the playfulness of some of these ideas then kind of emerge, and we start to investigate them and bring them into reality. So one of my students and I, kind of back in 2018, were trying to imagine how might we reimagine materials and think about how mushrooms could become new wall systems, mycelium bricks as an example, and can they stand the test of a compression exercise with hydraulic press and competing against concrete. Another kind of material sample that we started to investigate was thinking about 3D printing clay and how we might reinvestigate our ornament when it comes to terracotta on facade systems. As we know, the Guarantee building, as a prominent example in Buffalo, might be able to be modernized using some of these digital fabrication techniques in new ways. This ultimately has now kind of moved back up into scale, in which me and my partner, as part of MOVE, have been working on competitions to be able to essentially work at the scale of installations again, trying to implement some of these materials back into a larger system. So hopefully this will get built in New Jersey by next year as a part of a competition that we have submitted for. So ultimately, all of this has kind of bridged the gaps between thinking about how we might innovate and practice, but also kind of reimagining what the next generation of architecture might be. So we heard a lot about present projects here today. I think a lot of the work that we do at the school and also in my practice are about what might the next form of architecture take on as we move forward in the next couple of years. Thank you.